Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 6 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-104 Microsoft Azure Administrator exam. Test your knowledge with exam-focused questions covering key Azure administration concepts. Choose your answer before the timer ends, then review the correct answer, clear explanation, and practical exam tip. Let us begin part 6. We will now analyze question number 202. We are now working with container instances. Begin by examining the scenario. Your organization is developing a containerized application that processes batches of flat files. You plan to deploy the container using Azure Container Instances, ACI. The application requires a persistent storage volume to read input files and write output logs that remain available even if the container restarts. Which Azure storage service should you use to provide the persistent volume mount for the container? Compare the following options. Option A is Azure Blob Storage. Option B is Azure Files. Option C is Azure Table Storage. Option D is Azure Queue Storage. The best answer is option B, Azure Files. Azure Container Instances, ACI, supports mounting Azure file shares as persistent volumes directly into the container's file system. This allows stateful data, configuration files, and logs to persist beyond the lifecycle of the container group. A. While blob storage provides object storage, ACI cannot mount a blob container as a standard persistent file system volume directly, without advanced CSI driver configurations in AKS. Azure Files is the native, supported method for ACI C and D. Table and queue storage are no SQL/messaging services, respectively, and cannot be mounted as file system volumes. Keep this examination point in mind. To persist state in Azure Container Instances, ACI, create an Azure file share and mount it as a volume in the container configuration. Review question number 203. Carefully. Review the scenario carefully. Your organization manages a Microsoft Entra ID tenant named fabricamacorp.onmicrosoft.com. Your company recently purchased the public domain name fabricam.com. You add fabricam.com as a custom domain name to Microsoft Entra ID. Before the domain can be used for user accounts, Microsoft Entra ID requires you to verify domain ownership. Which type of DNS record must you create in your public DNS zone to verify the domain? Review each available choice. Choice A, PTR. Choice B, MX. Choice C, NSEC. Choice D, RSIG. The correct answer is option B, MX. The key reason is when adding a custom domain to Microsoft Entra ID, you must prove ownership of the domain. Azure provides a specific string that you must add to your domain's public DNS records. You can prove ownership by creating either a TXT record, preferred, or an MX record. The remaining options are incorrect because A PTR, pointer, record is used for reverse DNS lookups, not for domain ownership verification. C and D, NSEC and RRSIG are records associated with DNSSEC to ensure DNS integrity. They are not used by Azure for domain verification. Exam tip. To verify a custom domain in Microsoft Entra ID, you must add either a TXT or MX record containing the Azure-provided verification code to the domain's public DNS zone. Now consider question number 205. This question moves us into VM scale sets. Scenario. You have an Azure subscription that contains the following resource groups: RG App, location, East US, RG Data, location, West US, RG Hub, location, Central US. Scale set prod is a virtual machine scale set located in West US and stored in RG App. It uses flexible orchestration mode and has single placement group set to false. You need to create a new standalone Azure virtual machine and attach it to scale set prod during creation. Select the allowed resource group and location configurations for the new virtual machine. Review each blank and choose the most appropriate option. The first statement reads, valid resource groups, the blank. Choose between RG App only, RG App or RG Data only, or RG App, RG Data, or RG Hub. The second statement reads, valid locations, the blank. Choose between East US only, West US only, East US or West US only, or East US, West US, or Central US. The correct value for Statement 1 is RGApp only. ScaleSet prod is an RGApp, and an attached VM must use the same resource group. The correct value for Statement 2 is West US only. ScaleSet prod is in West US, so the attached VM must also be in West US. Remember this distinction for the exam. For VMSS flexible attachment, verify same resource group, same regional or zonal placement, flexible orchestration, and single placement group set to false. Let us work through question number 206. Consider the following scenario. You manage an Azure subscription containing 150 virtual machines. Your organization wants to proactively reduce monthly compute costs without implementing complex monitoring queries. You need a built-in tool that quickly analyzes your environment and identifies underutilized virtual machines that can be resized to a less expensive SKU. Which Azure Portal Blade provides this specific capability natively? Choose from the following options. Option A is Advisor. Option B is Metrics. Option C is Log Analytics. Option D is Service Health. The appropriate choice is Option A, Advisor. This is correct because Azure Advisor automatically analyzes resource configuration and usage telemetry across your Azure environment. It provides personalized, actionable recommendations categorized by reliability, security, performance, cost, and operational excellence. The cost recommendations natively highlight underutilized virtual machines and suggest right-sizing, resizing to a cheaper SKU, or shutting them down to save money. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Metrics allows you to plot CPU or memory usage for individual virtual machines, but it does not automatically analyze the entire fleet and generate right-sizing recommendations. C. Log Analytics requires writing KQL queries to evaluate performance data across multiple virtual machines. It is not a quick, built-in recommendation tool. D. Service Health provides alerts and guidance on Azure platform outages and planned maintenance, not cost optimization recommendations. Rely on Azure Advisor to quickly find cost-saving recommendations, such as identifying idle or underutilized virtual machines and unused ExpressRoute circuits. Question number 207. The focus now shifts to Network Watcher. Consider this scenario. You manage an Azure subscription named Subnetworking. The subscription contains the virtual networks, storage account, and log analytics workspace that will be used for virtual network flow logs and traffic analytics. You need to ensure that an administrator named admin_netops can enable and configure traffic analytics while following least privilege. You assign the network contributor role to admin_netops at the subscription scope. Does this meet the goal? Review the options. Option A. Yes. Option B. No. The required response is option B, no. Here is the technical justification. Network contributor includes the network watcher and flow log network actions, but it excludes required storage, log analytics workspace, data collection rule, and data collection endpoint actions. Additional scoped roles or a custom role are required to configure traffic analytics completely. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. Network contributor alone does not provide all permissions required by traffic analytics, even when assigned at the subscription scope. A useful examination rule is this. Traffic analytics needs flow log permissions plus access to its storage and log analytics/DCR resources. Network contributor alone is insufficient. Proceed to question number 208. Review the situation. You manage an Azure subscription named Subnetworking. The subscription contains all resources required for virtual network flow logs and traffic analytics. You need to ensure that an administrator named admin_netops can enable and configure traffic analytics for the subscription. You assign the owner role to admin_netops at the subscription scope. Does this meet the goal? Available choices. Choice A. Yes. Choice B. No. In this case, select option A. Yes. The reasoning is as follows. Owner grants full resource management access and role assignment permissions at the subscription scope. It therefore includes the network, storage, log analytics workspace, data collection rule, and data collection endpoint permissions required to configure traffic analytics. The alternatives can be eliminated because B, owner provides all required permissions, although it is broader than a least privilege assignment. The key takeaway is a broad role can meet a permission goal even when it is not least privilege. Read the requirement carefully before rejecting owner or contributor. The next item is question number 209. We are moving to AZ copy. You are preparing a script that uses AZ copy to migrate data from an on-premises server into an Azure storage account named Corp Data. The script will transfer documents to an Azure Blob storage container and copy file hierarchies to an Azure file storage share within the same storage account. You must specify the supported authentication methods AZ copy can use for each service. Select the correct authentication methods supported by AZ copy for each storage type. Choose the correct entry for every drop-down field. Statement 1. Authentication for Azure Blob Storage, the blank. The options for this statement are Microsoft Entra ID only, Shared Access Signatures, SAS, only, or Microsoft Entra ID and Shared Access Signatures, SAS. Statement 2. Authentication for Azure File Storage, the blank. The options for this statement are Microsoft Entra ID only, Shared Access Signatures, SAS, only, or Microsoft Entra ID and Shared Access Signatures, SAS. For Statement 1, select Microsoft Entra ID and Shared Access Signatures, SAS. Blob transfers support identity-based authorization and SAS. For Statement 2, select Microsoft Entra ID and Shared Access Signatures, SAS. Azure Files Transfer support Microsoft Entra ID with storage file data roles and also support SAS. Keep this examination point in mind. Current AZ copy supports Microsoft Entra ID and SAS for both blob storage and Azure Files. Assign the service-specific data role for identity-based access. Proceed to question number 210. Review the situation. You have an Azure subscription containing the following resources: RG East, Resource Group in East US, RG West, Resource Group in West US, Vault 1, Recovery Services Vault in West Europe, located within RG East, Storage 1, Standard Storage Account in East US, located within RG West, Storage 2, Standard Storage Account in West US, located within RG East, Storage 3, Standard Storage Account in West Europe, located within RG West, Analytics 1, Log Analytics Workspace in East US, located within RG East. Analytics 2, Log Analytics Workspace in West US, located within RG West, Analytics 3, Log Analytics Workspace in West Europe, located within RG East. You plan to configure an Azure Monitor diagnostic setting for Vault 1 to route Azure backup resource logs to both a storage account and a Log Analytics Workspace. Which storage accounts and which Log Analytics Workspaces can you select as destinations for the logs generated by Vault 1? Select the value that correctly completes each statement. For the first statement, supported storage accounts, the blank. Select from Storage 3 only or Storage 1, Storage 2, and Storage 3. For the second statement, supported Log Analytics Workspaces, the blank. Select from Analytics 3 only or Analytics 1, Analytics 2, and Analytics 3. Statement 1 should be completed with Storage 3 only. The storage destination must be in West Europe, the region of Vault 1. Statement 2 should be completed with Analytics 1, Analytics 2, and Analytics 3. Log Analytics Workspace destinations are not restricted to the monitored resources region. Exam tip. For regional resources, diagnostic setting storage accounts and event hubs must be in region. Log Analytics Workspaces can be in another region. The next item is question number 211. You manage an Azure subscription named Subnetworking. You need to ensure that an administrator named admin_NetOps can enable and configure virtual network flow logs and traffic analytics for the subscription. You assign the reader role to admin_NetOps at the subscription scope. Does this meet the goal? The options are: Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. In this case, select option B, no. The requirement is satisfied because reader provides view-only access. Enabling virtual network flow logs and traffic analytics requires write permissions for flow log resources and access to the associated storage, log analytics, data collection rule, and data collection endpoint resources. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Reader cannot create or modify the required monitoring and data collection configuration. Remember this distinction for the exam. Reader can inspect network watcher resources but cannot configure flow logs or traffic analytics. Let us examine question number 212. Next, we enter the topic of availability zones. Let us first review the situation. You are designing the architecture for a mission-critical web application that will be hosted on 3 Azure virtual machines. The business continuity requirements dictate that the application must survive a massive facility-level failure, such as a complete power loss or natural disaster affecting a single Azure data center, with at least 2 virtual machines remaining operational. Which deployment strategy guarantees this level of isolation? Now examine the possible answers. Choice A, deploy all 3 virtual machines in a single availability set. Choice B, deploy all 3 virtual machines in a single availability zone. Choice C, deploy each virtual machine in a separate availability zone. Choice D, deploy each virtual machine in a separate availability set. The best answer is option C, deploy each virtual machine in a separate availability zone. Availability zones are physically separate data centers, or groups of data centers, within an Azure region, each equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking. Deploying the virtual machines across 3 different availability zones ensures that if one entire data center goes offline, the other 2 virtual machines remain completely unaffected in their respective distinct physical locations. A and D, availability sets only protect against localized hardware failures, like a rack power supply or top-of-rack switch failure, within a single data center. If the entire data center fails, all virtual machines in the availability set will fail. B, deploying all virtual machines into the same availability zone places them in the same physical data center, leaving them vulnerable to a facility-level failure. To protect against entire data center failures within a region, deploy your workloads across availability zones. To protect against localized hardware rack failures within a single data center, use availability sets. Next, question number 213. Scenario. An administrator creates an Azure virtual machine named AppServer01 in the RG Network A resource group. The virtual machine uses a managed OS disk and connects to a subnet in VNet A. You need to move the workload to a subnet in VNet B, which is in RG Network B. You must preserve the installed application and data without manually copying them. Identify the 2 actions required in the correct order. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate value. Review statement 1, first action, the blank. The available choices are delete AppServer01 while retaining the managed OS disk, detach the network interface from AppServer01, or move the network interface to RG Network B. Review statement 2, second action, the blank. The available choices are attach the existing network interface to VNet B, create only a new network interface in VNet B, or create a new virtual machine in VNet B by using the retained OS disk. The answer to the first statement is delete AppServer01 while retaining the managed OS disk. The OS disk must be released from the existing VM but preserved. The answer to the second statement is create a new virtual machine in VNet B by using the retained OS disk. The retained OS disk preserves the application and data while the new NIC places the VM in VNet B. A useful examination rule is this. To place an existing VM workload in another VNet, preserve the OS disk, delete the VM resource, and recreate the VM with a new NIC in the target VNet. We will now analyze question number 214. Next, we enter the topic of monitor alerts. Consider the following scenario. You manage an Azure virtual machine named SRV App01 running Windows Server. You need an Azure Monitor alert that triggers whenever more than 5 error-level events are written to the Windows System Event Log within 15 minutes. You deploy the Azure Monitor Agent and Associate SRV App01 with a data collection rule that sends Windows System events to a Log Analytics workspace. You then create a metric alert on the percentage CPU metric of SRV App01. Does this meet the goal? Compare the following options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The correct answer is option B, no. The key reason is the agent and data collection rule correctly send Windows events to Log Analytics, but a percentage CPU metric alert does not evaluate event log records. You must create a log search alert that runs a KQL query against the workspace and applies the 5 events in 15 minutes threshold. The remaining options are incorrect because A, the selected alert signal measures CPU utilization rather than error-level Windows system events. The key takeaway is use metric alerts for numeric platform or guest metrics and log search alerts for event records queried from Log Analytics. Review question number 215. Carefully. Let us first review the situation. You manage an Azure virtual machine named SRV App01 running Windows Server. You need to create an Azure Monitor alert that triggers whenever more than 5 error-level events are written to the Windows System Event Log on SRV App01 within a 15-minute window. You deploy the Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, extension to SRV App01. You create a data collection rule, DCR, to collect the system event logs and send them to a Log Analytics workspace. Finally, you create a log search alert rule in Azure Monitor, specifying the Log Analytics workspace as the scope. Does this meet the goal? Review each available choice. Option A is yes. Option B is no. The appropriate choice is option A. Yes. This is correct because this is the modern and fully supported method to alert on guest OS logs. The Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, captures the Windows event logs based on the data collection rule, DCR, and routes them to a Log Analytics workspace. Once the data is in the workspace, you can use a Custo query language, KQL, log search alert rule to evaluate the threshold, for example, more than 5 errors in 15 minutes, and trigger the alert. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. The solution accurately outlines the end-to-end architecture required to alert on guest OS logs using current Azure features, making no incorrect. Keep this examination point in mind. The Azure Monitor Agent, AMA, and data collection rules, DCRs, replace the legacy Log Analytics Agent, MMA. Always route guest OS logs to a Log Analytics workspace to utilize log search alert rules. Question number 216. You manage an Azure subscription that contains an Azure virtual machine named FilesProd running Windows Server. FilesProd is protected by a daily Azure backup policy. A ransomware attack encrypts the data volume on FilesProd. You need to recover the environment using the latest available backup. Identify the supported destination locations for item-level recovery, file recovery, and full VM restore operations. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate value. Statement 1. You can perform an item-level recovery, file recovery, of FilesProd to the blank. The available choices are FilesProd only, FilesProd or a new Azure virtual machine only, or any Windows computer that has internet connectivity. Statement 2. You can perform a full restore of FilesProd to the blank. The available choices are FilesProd only, FilesProd or a new Azure virtual machine only, or any Windows computer that has internet connectivity. The correct value for Statement 1 is any Windows computer that has internet connectivity. The ILR script mounts the backup as an ISCSI volume on any connected Windows machine. The correct value for Statement 2 is files prod or a new Azure virtual machine only. Full Azure VM restores either replace the existing disks or provision a new VM in Azure. Exam tip. Item-level recovery allows you to mount a backup snapshot as a local drive on any internet-connected machine with the same or later OS version. Full VM restores are limited to replacing the original VM or creating a new Azure VM. Now consider question number 217. This question moves us into deployment slots. Scenario. You manage an Azure App Service web app named Billing App. The app is configured with 2 deployment slots, production and staging. You deploy a new application version to the staging slot and conduct preliminary tests. You then perform a swap operation, putting the new version into the production slot. Shortly after the swap, users report severe performance issues and application crashes. You need to revert Billing App to the previous stable version as quickly as possible. What is the fastest way to achieve this? Option A. Restore the production slot from an app service backup. Option B. Redeploy the previous application code directly to the production slot. Option C. Swap the slots again. Option D. Clone the staging slot to a new app service plan. The required response is option C. Swap the slots again. Here is the technical justification. A deployment slot swap exchanges the app content and applicable configuration between the source and target slots. After the swap, the previous stable version is available in the staging slot. To roll back a problematic deployment instantly, you simply swap the slots again, immediately routing production traffic back to the old stable code. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. Restoring from a backup takes significantly more time, as data must be copied and restored, and is unnecessary since the old code still exists in the staging slot. B. Redeploying code requires initiating a new CI/CD pipeline or manual upload, which is far slower than a simple slot swap. D. Cloning the slot creates an entirely new resource and does not resolve the routing problem for the existing production endpoint. Remember this distinction for the exam. Deployment slots enable zero downtime deployments and instant rollbacks. If a new deployment fails in production after a swap, swap the slots again to immediately restore the previous version. Let us work through question number 218. Begin by examining the scenario. You have an Azure subscription named Sub-App Services. You assign an administrator named admin_deploy to deploy infrastructure. Admin_deploy uses a single Azure Resource Manager, ARM, template to deploy a virtual network, an app service plan, and a web app into a resource group named RG Frontend. You need to audit the deployment and view the raw JSON of the ARM template that admin_deploy submitted. From which blade in the Azure portal can you view the historical deployment template? Choose from the following options. Choice A, the RG Frontend Resource Group blade. Choice B, the App Service Plan blade. Choice C, the Web App blade. Choice D, the Virtual Network blade. The required response is option A. The RG Frontend Resource Group blade. The reasoning is as follows. ARM template deployments are tracked at the scope where the deployment was initiated. When deploying standard resources into a resource group, the deployment history, operational statuses, and the exact ARM templates used are stored and viewable under the deployments blade of that specific resource group. The alternatives can be eliminated because B, C, and D, the individual resource blades, App Service Plan, Web App, Virtual Network, allow you to view the configuration of those specific resources, but they do not contain the unified ARM template deployment history. To review past ARM template deployments, input parameters, and output values, navigate to the deployments blade of the target resource group. The next key item is question number 221. We are moving to VM sizes. This scenario establishes the key requirement. You manage an Azure virtual machine named Batch VM that processes end-of-month payroll data. Batch VM hosts a legacy application that does not support horizontal scaling, multiple instances. During the last 3 days of every month, the application experiences heavy CPU contention that slows down processing. You need to implement an automated Azure runbook that executes on a schedule to increase the compute resources available to the application at the end of the month, and reduce them afterward. Which task must the runbook execute? Focus on the distinction between these options. Option A. Add batch VM to a virtual machine scale set. Option B. Deploy the desired state configuration, DSC, extension to batch VM. Option C. Modify the VM size property of batch VM. Option D. Increase the virtual CPU quota for the subscription. In this case, select option C. Modify the VM size property of batch VM. The requirement is satisfied because the legacy application cannot support horizontal scaling, scale out via multiple instances, you must use vertical scaling, scale up. Vertical scaling in Azure is accomplished by changing the virtual machine size, SKU, to one with more CPU cores or memory. An automation runbook can be scheduled to run PowerShell or CLI commands to update the VM size property and restart the VM during the required timeframes. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Adding the VM to a scale set enables horizontal scaling, adding more instances, which the legacy application does not support. B. Desired state configuration, DSC, is used to manage the guest OS configuration, like installing server roles or registry keys, not the underlying hardware compute allocation. D. Increasing the virtual CPU quota simply allows the subscription to deploy more cores overall, it does not automatically assign those cores to the existing virtual machine. A useful examination rule is this. Vertical scaling, changing a VM size/SKU, requires a VM restart. It is used when an application cannot support distributed, multiple instance architectures. Let us examine question number 222. Review the scenario carefully. A resource group contains an Azure virtual machine named App Server 1. The virtual machine has an extension whose protected settings section contains a storage account key. You export the resource group as an ARM template and plan to redeploy the environment. Which value must you add separately because it is not included in the exported template? Now examine the possible answers. Option A is the secret value stored in the extension's protected settings section. Option B is the virtual machine size. Option C is the operating system image publisher. Option D is the network interface resource ID. The best answer is option A. The secret value stored in the extension's protected settings section. ARM template export does not include protected settings because they can contain credentials and other secrets. You must supply those secure values separately before redeploying the extension. B. The VM size is a normal resource property and can be exported. C. The image publisher is part of the VM image reference and can be exported when available. D. Resource references such as the NIC resource ID can be represented in the exported template. The key takeaway is exported templates omit secrets in VM extension protected settings. Reinsert them securely, preferably by using secure parameters or key vault references. Question number 223. The focus now shifts to Azure Monitor logs. Consider this scenario. You deploy an Azure virtual machine named LinWeb01 running Ubuntu Server 22.04. You need to collect guest OS performance counters and syslog events from LinWeb01 in a log analytics workspace. What should you configure? Review the options. Option A. The Azure Performance Diagnostics extension. Option B. Azure Analysis Services. Option C. The Azure Monitor Agent and an associated data collection role. Option D. Azure HD Insight. The correct answer is option C. The Azure Monitor Agent and an associated data collection role. The key reason is Azure Monitor Agent collects Linux guest telemetry according to an associated data collection role. The rule defines the syslog facilities, performance counters, and log analytics workspace destination. The remaining options are incorrect because A. Azure Performance Diagnostics is a troubleshooting extension, not the standard continuous collection path for Linux syslog and performance data. B. Azure Analysis Services is a data modeling service. D. Azure HD Insight is a managed analytics cluster service. Keep this examination point in mind. AMA performs collection, while the DCR defines what to collect and where to send it. Both are required for VM guest log ingestion. The next item is question number 224. Consider this scenario. You manage an Azure subscription named Subprod containing a resource group named RG Core Infra. Over the past 6 months, various team members have deployed numerous resources into RG Core Infra using bicep files and ARM templates. You are conducting an audit and need to view the exact date, time, and execution duration of a specific deployment that created a virtual network. You navigate to the RG Core Infra resource group blade in the Azure portal and click on Deployments. Does this meet the goal? The options are: Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The appropriate choice is option A, yes. This is correct because the deployments blade within a resource group stores the historical record of all template-based deployments executed at that scope. Clicking on it allows you to see the deployment name, exact timestamp, execution duration, parameters provided, and the specific resources provisioned during that run. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. The solution accurately points to the correct location for deployment history, so no is incorrect. Exam tip. For auditing ARM/bicep template execution history, including timestamps and input parameters, always check the deployments blade of the target resource group. Proceed to question number 225. Review the situation. You manage an Azure subscription named Subprod containing a resource group named RG Core Infra. Over the past 6 months, various team members have deployed numerous resources into RG Core Infra using bicep files and ARM templates. You are conducting an audit and need to view the exact date, time, and execution duration of a specific deployment that created a virtual network. You navigate to the RG Core Infra resource group blade in the Azure portal and click on Export Template. Does this meet the goal? Available choices. Option A, yes. Option B, no. The required response is option B, no. Here is the technical justification. The Export Template blade generates an ARM template representing the current state of the resources inside the resource group. It does not provide historical deployment logs, timestamps, or execution durations for past deployments. To view that information, you must use the Deployments blade. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. The solution points to the incorrect blade for retrieving historical deployment timestamps. Remember this distinction for the exam. Export Template is for capturing the current state of a resource group for future deployments. Deployments is for auditing past template executions. Now consider question number 226. Scenario. You have an Azure subscription that contains the following resource groups and proximity placement groups: PPG's RG Data, location, East US, RG Web, location, West Europe, PPG Alpha, location, East US, resource group, RG Data, PPG Beta, location, West Europe, resource group, RG Web, PPG Gamma, location, East US, resource group, RG Web. You deploy a virtual machine scale set named VMSS frontend into the West Europe region, residing in the RG Data resource group. You need to assign a proximity placement group to VMSS frontend to minimize network latency between the underlying virtual machine instances. Which proximity placement group must you select? Choice A, PPG Gamma only. Choice B, PPG Beta only. Choice C, PPG Alpha and PPG Gamma only. Choice D, PPG Alpha, PPG Beta, and PPG Gamma. The correct answer is option B, PPG Beta only. The reasoning is as follows. A proximity placement group is a logical grouping used to ensure that Azure compute resources are physically located close to each other in the same data center to reduce latency. Because it dictates physical hardware placement, a resource, like AVMSS, can only be assigned to a proximity placement group that resides in the exact same Azure region, location. VMSS frontend is located in West Europe. Therefore, the proximity placement group must also be located in West Europe. Only PPG Beta meets this requirement. The resource group alignment does not matter. The alternatives can be eliminated because A, PPG Gamma is located in East US, while the VMSS is in West Europe. C and D, PPG Alpha is located in East US. Cross-region proximity placement group assignment is unsupported. A proximity placement group must be created in the exact same Azure region as the virtual machines or scale sets that will be assigned to it. Question number 227. Treat this as an easy question. You are preparing an ARM template to deploy a cluster of 6 identical web servers into a single Azure Virtual Network subnet. The deployment requirements are as follows. Every web server requires both a private IP address and a dedicated public IP address. All 6 web servers must share the exact same inbound and outbound firewall security rules. For example, allow port 443 inbound, deny port 22 inbound. To satisfy the requirements with the least amount of management overhead, what is the minimum number of network interfaces, NICs, and network security groups, NSGs, you must deploy? Choose the correct entry for every drop-down field. For the first statement, minimum number of network interfaces, NICs the blank. The options for this statement are 1, 6, 12, or 18. For the second statement, minimum number of network security groups, NSGs the blank. The options for this statement are 1, 2, 6, or 12. The answer to the first statement is 6. Each of the 6 virtual machines requires its own network interface. The answer to the second statement is 1. A single NSG can be applied at the subnet level to secure all 6 virtual machines simultaneously. A useful examination rule is this. To minimize administrative overhead when deploying multiple virtual machines with identical security requirements, create a single network security group, NSG, and associate it with the shared subnet. Now consider question number 228. Review the situation. You manage an ARM template that deploys 50 Windows Server virtual machines. The deployment requires a local administrator password parameter. You must prevent the password from being hard-coded in the template or stored in plain text in a parameter file. What should you create? The options are: Choice A, an Azure storage account and a shared access signature. Choice B, an Azure Key Vault configured to allow ARM template deployments to retrieve a secret. Choice C, a recovery services vault and a backup policy. Choice D, a Microsoft Entra conditional access policy. In this case, select option B. An Azure Key Vault configured to allow ARM template deployments to retrieve a secret. The requirement is satisfied because store the administrator password as a Key Vault secret and reference it from the deployment parameter. Configure the vault and deployment identity so Resource Manager can retrieve the secret during deployment without exposing it in the template or parameter file. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Storage and SAS are not the supported secret reference mechanism for ARM deployments. C. Recovery services vaults protect backup data, not deployment secrets. D. Conditional access controls sign-ins and does not store infrastructure secrets. The key takeaway is use a Key Vault secret reference for sensitive ARM parameters and grant only the deployment permissions needed to retrieve that secret. The next item is question number 229. You manage an Azure subscription with 3 app service plans configured as follows: Plan Win East, operating system equals Windows, location equals East US Plan Lin East, operating system equals Linux, location equals East US Plan Lin West, operating system equals Linux, location equals West US. You are preparing to provision 2 new Azure web apps, web app node, runtime stack equals node.js, Location equals east-us-webapp.net, runtime stack equals ASP.NET version 4.8, location equals east-us. Identify which existing app service plans can be used to host each web app. Review each blank and choose the most appropriate option. The first statement reads, available plans for web app node, the blank. Choose between Plan Lin East only, Plan Win East and Plan Lin East only, Plan Lin East and Plan Lin West only, or all three plans. The second statement reads, available plans for webapp.net, the blank. Choose between Plan Win East only, Plan Lin East only, Plan Win East and Plan Lin East only, or all three plans. For Statement 1, select Plan Win East and Plan Lin East only. Node.js supports both Windows and Linux, but the plan must be located in East US. For Statement 2, select Plan Win East only. ASP.NET version 4.8 strictly requires Windows, and the plan must be located in East US. Keep this examination point in mind. When assigning an Azure web app to an app service plan, the plan must match the web app's Azure region, and the plan's OS, Windows/Linux, must support the application's runtime stack. Proceed to question number 230. Consider this scenario. You manage an Azure subscription with two resource groups, RG Finance, location, East US, RG Marketing, location, West US. RG Finance contains an unassociated public IP address named PubIP East. RG Marketing contains a running virtual machine named WebVM, West US. WebVM is attached to a network interface named WebNIC and a managed OS disk named WebDisk. You are reorganizing your Azure environment and evaluating resource move capabilities. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement is, you can move WebDisk to RG Finance while WebVM remains running in RG Marketing. The second statement is, you can move WebNIC to RG Finance without moving WebVM. The third statement is, if you move PubIP East from RG Finance to RG Marketing, its location property remains East US. The answer to Statement 1 is no. Attached managed disks cannot be moved to a different resource group independently of the VM. The answer to Statement 2 is no. Attached network interfaces must be moved alongside their parent virtual machine. The answer to Statement 3 is yes. Resource moves change the logical container, resource group, but they do not change the physical Azure region, location, of the resource. Exam tip. When moving Azure virtual machines across resource groups, you must move all dependent resources, NICs, attached disks, simultaneously. Furthermore, moving a resource never changes its physical Azure region. Question number 231. Now. Scenario. You need to deploy a new Azure storage account by using Azure CLI. The account must support Azure Blob Storage and Azure Files. Support hot, cool, and archive tiers for blob data. Keep a secondary copy in another Azure region for regional disaster protection. Minimize cost without requiring read access to the secondary region. You run the following command, AZ storage account create grg data ncorp storage edita 1 kind, select 1, SKU, select 2. Select the appropriate values. Select the value that correctly completes each statement. Review Statement 1, kind, select 1, the blank. Select from storage, storage v2, or blob storage. Review Statement 2, SKU, select 2, the blank. Select from standard_LRS, standard_GRS, standard_RAGRS, or premium_LRS. Statement 1 should be completed with storage v2. General purpose v2 supports the required storage services and blob tiers. Statement 2 should be completed with standard_GRS. GRS provides cross-region replication without the added read access capability and cost of RAGRS. Remember this distinction for the exam. Choose storage v2 for general-purpose modern storage. Use GRS for cross-region durability and RAGRS only when applications must read from the secondary endpoint. Question number 233. This is marked as a medium question. Scenario. You configure an Azure Virtual Machine Scale set named AppScale1 with custom autoscale parameters, initial instance count, 5 minimum number of virtual machines, 3 maximum number of virtual machines, 25 scale-out rule, CPU threshold greater than 75% for a duration of 10 minutes, increase instance count by 3 scale-in rule, CPU threshold less than 25% for a duration of 10 minutes, decrease instance count by 4. Select the option that completes each statement based on the autoscale rules. Review Statement 1. If AppScale1 experiences 80% CPU utilization for 12 minutes immediately following deployment, the scale set will run the blank. Choose between 3 virtual machines, 5 virtual machines, 8 virtual machines, 11 virtual machines, or 25 virtual machines. Review Statement 2. If AppScale1 first experiences 20% CPU utilization for 12 minutes following deployment, and is then utilized at 45% for 12 minutes, the scale set will run the blank. Choose between 1 virtual machine, 3 virtual machines, 5 virtual machines, 8 virtual machines, or 25 virtual machines. The answer to the first statement is 8 virtual machines. Scale-out adds 3 virtual machines to the initial 5. The answer to the second statement is 3 virtual machines. Scale-in reduces count to the configured minimum limit of 3. Autoscale rules will never scale below configured minimum VM limits or above maximum limits regardless of rule calculations. Question number 234. Now, you plan to create an Azure storage account in the West Europe region. The storage account must meet the following requirements: synchronously replicate data across 3 availability zones in the primary region. Remain accessible if an individual data center in the region experiences an outage. Select the appropriate configuration options to meet the requirements. Select the value that correctly completes each statement. Statement 1. Replicate data using the blank redundancy option. The options for this statement are Zone Redundant Storage, ZRS, Locally Redundant Storage, LRS, Geo-Redundant Storage, GRS, or Read Access Geo-Redundant Storage, RAGRS. Statement 2. Set the storage account type to the blank. The options for this statement are Storage v2, General Purpose v2, Blob Storage, or Storage, General Purpose v1. Statement 1 should be completed with Zone Redundant Storage, ZRS. ZRS replicates synchronously across availability zones. Statement 2 should be completed with Storage v2, General Purpose v2. Storage v2 supports ZRS and general storage services. A useful examination rule is this. ZRS provides synchronous replication across local availability zones without requiring cross-region replication. Now consider question number 235. An administrator needs to grant security engineer Alex permissions to deploy virtual machines and configure virtual network settings within a dedicated Azure resource group. The solution must adhere to the principle of least privilege. Which built-in role-based access control, RBAC, role should you assign to Alex? Available choices. Option A, Contributor. Option B, Virtual Machine Contributor. Option C, Owner. Option D, Virtual Machine Administrator Login. The best answer is option A, Contributor. Contributor grants full permissions to manage all resources, including virtual machines and virtual networks, but cannot grant permissions to others. Virtual Machine Contributor cannot manage virtual networks. Contributor provides the least privilege required to manage both virtual machines and VNets. B. Virtual Machine Contributor cannot manage virtual network configurations. C. Owner includes role assignment privileges, violating least privilege. D. Virtual Machine Administrator Login only grants OS login rights to virtual machines. The key takeaway is Virtual Machine Contributor manages virtual machines and disks, but managing virtual networks requires permissions granted by contributor or network contributor. Question number 236. Review the situation. An Azure subscription contains the following resource groups. RG Alpha contains WebApp 01 and has no resource lock. RG Beta has a read-only lock. RG Gamma has a cannot delete lock. RG Delta has no resource lock. WebApp01 supports moves between resource groups, and all required dependent resources will be moved with it. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Review Statement 1, WebApp01 can be moved to RG Beta. Review Statement 2, WebApp01 can be moved to RG Gamma. Review Statement 3, WebApp01 can be moved to RG Delta. Statement 1 should be marked no. A read-only lock on the target resource group blocks the move operation. Statement 2 should be marked yes. A cannot delete lock does not prevent adding a supported resource to the group. Statement 3 should be marked yes. No resource lock blocks the move. Keep this examination point in mind. Read-only locks block write operations, including moves into or out of a resource group. Cannot delete locks primarily block deletion. The next item is question number 237. Next, we enter the topic of Azure files. Consider this scenario. An Azure subscription contains a storage sync service named Sync Service 1. Sync Service 1 contains a sync group whose cloud endpoint is the Azure file share shares 1. You need to synchronize shares 1 with the folder d:\data on an on-premises Windows server named Server 01. Which 3 actions should you perform? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. Select 3 answers that satisfy the requirement. Review the options. Choice A. Install the Azure File Sync agent on Server 01. Choice B. Register Server 01 with Sync Service 1. Choice C. Add d:\data on Server 01 as a server endpoint in the sync group. Choice D. Create an Azure container instance. Choice E. Deploy an on-premises data gateway. Select Option A. Install the Azure File Sync agent on Server 01, Option B. Register Server 01 with Sync Service 1, and Option C. Add d:\data on Server 01 as a server endpoint in the sync group. The key reason is Azure File Sync requires the agent on the Windows server, registration of that server with the storage sync service, and creation of a server endpoint that identifies the local folder to synchronize with the cloud endpoint. The remaining options are incorrect because D. Azure container instances are unrelated to Azure File Sync. E. An on-premises data gateway supports services such as Power BI and Logic apps and is not used to create an Azure File Sync endpoint. Exam tip. An Azure File Sync topology uses one cloud endpoint per sync group and one or more registered server endpoints. Let us examine question number 238. Let us first review the situation. A Microsoft Entra tenant has the required licenses and contains a security group named SSPR Pilot. You need to enable self-service password reset only for members of SSPR Pilot and require users to provide 2 authentication methods when resetting a password. Select the options that complete the required configuration. For the first statement, on the Password Reset Properties page, set Self-Service Password Reset enabled to the blank. The available choices are selected, all, or none. For the second statement, for the selected scope, choose the blank. The available choices are SSPR Pilot, all users, or global administrators. For the third statement, on the Authentication Methods page, set number of methods required to reset to the blank. The available choices are 2, 1, or 3. The correct value for Statement 1 is selected. Enables group-scoped SSPR. The correct value for Statement 2 is SSPR Pilot. Targets the required pilot group. The correct value for Statement 3 is 2. Requires 2 verification methods. Remember this distinction for the exam. Use selected to pilot SSPR with one group before enabling it for all users. Proceed to question number 239. This question moves us into AZ copy. Scenario. You need to upload a 2 TB folder from an on-premises Windows server to an Azure Blob container. The transfer must be scriptable and optimized for high-performance data movement. Which tool should you use? Option A, AZ Copy. Option B, Azure Resource Mover. Option C, Azure Data Box Gateway. Option D, Azure Cloud Shell File Upload. The appropriate choice is option A, AZ Copy. This is correct because AZ Copy is a high-performance command line utility designed to transfer data to and from Azure Blob Storage and Azure Files. It supports scripted, recursive, and resumable transfers. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Azure Resource Mover relocates supported Azure resources between regions, not file data. C. Databox Gateway is a virtual appliance and is unnecessary for this direct scripted transfer. D. Cloud Shell Upload is not designed for multi-terabyte transfers. Use AZ Copy for high-performance command line transfers involving blob storage or Azure files. Now consider question number 240. You have an on-premises file server named FileServer 1 running Windows Server 2022. An Azure Storage Sync service contains a sync group with an Azure file share configured as its cloud endpoint. You need to synchronize the folder d:/shares on FileServer 1 with the cloud endpoint. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? Move the appropriate actions to the answer area and arrange them in the correct order. The sequence must use these items. Item 1. Add d:/shares as a server endpoint in the sync group. Item 2. Create a recovery services vault. Item 3. Install the Azure File Sync agent on FileServer 1. Item 4. Deploy the DFS replication role on FileServer 1. Item 5. Register FileServer 1 with the Storage Sync service. The completed sequence is: the first item is install the Azure File Sync agent on FileServer 1. The second item is register FileServer 1 with the Storage Sync service. The third item is add d:/shares as a server endpoint in the sync group. Here is the technical justification. The Azure File Sync agent provides the synchronization components. The server must then be registered with the Storage Sync service before a local path on that registered server can be added as a server endpoint. A useful examination rule is this. For Azure File Sync, install the agent before server registration, and register the server before creating its server endpoint. Review question number 241. Carefully. Consider the following scenario. You have an Azure subscription with resources in multiple regions: Vault 1, Recovery Services Vault in Central US, Vault 2, Recovery Services Vault in West US, VM 1, Azure Virtual Machine in Central US, Storage 1, Storage Account in West US containing Blob Container Container 1 and Azure File Share Data 1 SQL 1, Azure SQL Database in East US. Select the appropriate options to indicate which resources can be protected by each Recovery Services Vault. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate value. The first statement reads, can use Vault 1 for backups, the blank. Select from VM1 only, VM1 and Data 1 only, VM1 and SQL 1 only, VM1, Container 1, and SQL 1, or VM1, Container 1, Data 1, and SQL 1. The second statement reads, can use Vault 2 for backups, the blank. Select from Data 1 only, Storage 1 only, VM1 and Data 1 only, Container 1 and Data 1 only, or Storage 1 and SQL 1 only. For Statement 1, select VM1 only. VM1 and Vault 1 are both in Central US. For Statement 2, select Data 1 only. The File Share and Vault 2 are both in West US. The key takeaway is match the vault type and region to the workload. Recovery Services Vaults protect Azure Virtual Machines and Azure File Shares, among other supported workloads. You have completed Part 6 of the AZ-104 Microsoft Azure Administrator Exam Practice Series. Keep building your Azure administration skills by opening the complete playlist and continuing with the remaining parts in sequence. If this session helped your preparation, like the video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam practice content. Share your score, doubts, or feedback in the comments. I would be happy to hear how your preparation is going. Thank you for learning with Tech with Kaushik. Keep practicing, and I will see you in the next part.